right, everybody, get comfy and grab some eggnog because we are diving deep into a holiday classic. We're talking about the 2000 film, How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Oh, yeah, this one is a fun one.
It really is. And we've got a super in-depth movie review to help us out, covering everything from the plot to the characters to the visuals.
Sounds like a great way to really break it down.
Exactly. We want to understand why this movie became such a huge deal, what worked, what didn't work, and how does it still resonate with audiences today?
Yeah, because this one really stuck around, huh? It's interesting how this adaptation came out right when there was that whole wave of classic children's books hitting the big screen.
Oh, totally. Like a nostalgia explosion at the box office.
Exactly. And those films usually have a built-in family audience, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this one was a massive box office hit.
For sure. For sure. But you know what? Bringing an iconic character like the Grinch to life, that's a whole different challenge.
It's a tough one to get right.
Especially with someone like Jim Carrey taking on the role. This review uses the words chaotic yet lovable to describe his performance.
Interesting.
I think they nailed it, personally. But what do you think? How does Carrey's comedic style, all that energy and those expressions, how does it work with the source material? Or maybe does it work against it?
That's a really good question. I mean, on the one hand, you've got Carrey's over-the-top energy, which definitely draws people in.
Right. You can't look away.
Exactly. And the makeup and prosthetics, they were seriously impressive. Oscar-worthy, even.
Oh, totally.
But then there's Carrey's humor, right? Yeah. It can be pretty adult, a lot of innuendo.
Right.
And some people felt like that just didn't quite fit with the world of Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, I see what you mean. A little bit jarring, maybe.
Yeah. Like trying to force a square peg into a round hole, comedically speaking.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance. And speaking of tricky balances, the review also talks about the tension between the movie's elaborate visuals and the simplicity of the original story.
Yeah, it's definitely visually striking, that's for sure.
It is. The review raves about the design of Whoville and the Grinch's lair. They really captured that iconic Dr. Seuss look.
Oh, they absolutely nailed the aesthetic, no doubt about it. But did they maybe go a little overboard with it all?
Interesting point.
Some argue that by expanding the story so much, adding all that detail to the Grinch's backstory, and making those Whoville celebrations so extravagant, well, it kind of muddies the original message of the story.
I see what you mean. Less focused.
Right. And the review does mention that there are some pacing issues, especially in those expanded scenes.
So maybe they sacrificed some of that heartwarming simplicity for like a visually stunning but kind of overstuffed experience.
You said it perfectly. And this actually ties into another interesting aspect the review brings up. How the Whos are portrayed in the film.
Oh, you mean how they come across as super materialistic?
Exactly.
I've always wondered about that. It feels like their crazy consumerism kind of clashes with the movie's message about the true meaning of Christmas.
I know, right? It's an interesting choice for sure.
What do you think they were going for with that?
Well, it could be a commentary on our modern-day consumer culture. Kind of updating the story for a contemporary audience.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's a delicate balance. Does it detract from that core message about the true spirit of Christmas, or does it make that message even more relevant to today's world? I think it's really open to interpretation.
Yeah, I can definitely see how people would have different takes on that.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, doesn't it? You're immersed in this whimsical world, and then suddenly, bam, you're confronted with this critique of consumerism.
It's true. You don't see that coming. But okay, let's not forget about the real heart of the story here.
Cindy Lou Who.
That's right. That tiny little girl who totally steals the show.
Absolutely.
The review points out how she's the emotional core of the film, always believing in the good in everyone, even the Grinch.
Yeah, she's a perfect contrast to the Grinch's cynicism. She represents innocence and hope.
And that song, Where Are You, Christmas? Oh my gosh, that one gets me every time.
It's such a beautiful song. So much emotion.
It adds so much depth to Cindy Lou Who's character.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to another crucial element that really adds to the film's impact. The music and the sound design.
Oh, yeah. It's got that perfect blend of Seussian whimsy and classic holiday cheer.
Exactly. The score is incredible. It does an amazing job of weaving those two elements together.
So well.
Like, take You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. The film's version is so playful and fun, but it also has this extra layer of depth that reflects the turmoil going on inside the Grinch.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's not just a silly song. It actually tells us something about the character.
Exactly. And that clever use of music continues throughout the whole film.
Yeah, I love that.
It's not just background noise. It's really part of the storytelling. It draws the audience deeper into the world of the film.
So we've got these amazing visuals, Jim Carrey's unique take on the Grinch, and a score that perfectly blends whimsy with emotion.
It's a pretty powerful combination.
It is. But like the review points out, there's this ongoing debate about whether the film sacrifices some of the original story's magic in favor of all that visual grandeur and added complexity.
Yeah, it's a tricky balancing act, and it's up to each viewer to decide whether the film gets it right or not.
Right. So what are your thoughts? Does all that visual spectacle and the expanded story, do they add to the heart of Dr. Seuss's message, or do they take away from it?
Yeah, it's a good point. Sometimes when you try to add too much to a simple story, you can actually weaken it.
Yeah, like adding a bunch of extra ingredients to a perfect cookie recipe, right? You just end up masking the original flavor.
Yeah.
So do you think that's what happened here? Did they lose some of that Grinch magic by trying to do too much?
I wouldn't say they completely lost the magic, but I get why some people might feel that way.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, the original story, it's really straightforward, right? The Grinch hates Christmas, he steals it, then he has a change of heart. It's a classic redemption arc.
Yeah.
But the movie, it throws in all these extra plot points and character development, which is interesting, but it might distract from the emotional core of the story.
So they kind of traded in some of that heartfelt simplicity for a more complex and visually driven narrative.
Yeah, you could say that.
The review mentions director Ron Howard's style, how he's good at family-friendly storytelling and balancing humor and emotion. So do you think his style was a good fit for this adaptation?
Ron Howard, he's a talented filmmaker, no doubt. He knows how to make those warm, engaging movies that appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think in this case, his style might have actually contributed to the movie moving away from the simplicity of the book.
Interesting. How so?
Well, he tends towards sentimentality, which works great in some movies, but with The Grinch, maybe it tipped the scales a little too far in that direction.
So it's not that he's not a good director, it's more about whether his style aligned with the tone of the original story.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Who's and their materialism again. Some people see it as a commentary on how materialistic our society is, which is interesting. But it's important to remember that even in the original Dr. Seuss book, the Who's are pretty festive, maybe even a little extravagant with their celebrations.
Oh, yeah, that's true. All those decorations and feasts and presents, it's a big part of who they are, even in the book.
Right. So the movie might be playing that aspect up a bit, but they didn't just completely make it up.
Right.
The question is, does the movie's portrayal go too far? Is it just the funny exaggeration, or does it become a caricature that kind of undermines the message of the story?
That is a tough question.
Yeah, and I think it's something that viewers are divided on. Some find it satirical and clever, while others think it distracts from the heart of the story. It makes me think about how adaptations always have to walk this fine line between staying true to the original and updating it for a new audience.
It's true. It's a tough balance to strike.
It really is. And with a story as popular as The Grinch, any changes are going to get people talking.
Oh, for sure. But this adaptation, even with all the debate surrounding it, it's become a holiday classic for a lot of people.
It really has.
Families watch it every year, even if they see its flaws. Why do you think this movie, with all its deviations from the book, why has it resonated with audiences so much?
That's a great question. I think nostalgia plays a big role, It's about shared experiences.
Yeah, the comfort of tradition.
Exactly. Even if we recognize that it's different from the book, it still evokes that feeling of holiday cheer with a little bit of mischief mixed in.
Yeah, and that appeals to people of all ages.
It really does. And it reminds us about the power of stories, how some narratives, even when they're adapted, they become part of our culture and our celebrations.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Now, let's get back to the core of the story here and talk about Cindy Lou Who. The review mentions her unwavering faith in people, even when faced with the Grinch's negativity.
Oh yeah, she's so pure.
Why do you think she's such a crucial character, both in the book and the film?
Well, I think Cindy Lou, who represents hope and compassion.
Yeah.
She's the opposite of the Grinch, right? She's innocent, trusting, and full of that Christmas spirit. And I think she's there to remind us about what Christmas is really about, the things that the Grinch has forgotten.
That's a great point. She's like the moral compass of the story, a light in the darkness. And especially in the movie where they expanded her scenes with the Grinch, you really see how powerful kindness and empathy can be.
Yeah, her belief in him, even when he's at his worst, it starts to break down his cynicism and eventually leads to his redemption.
It's a good reminder that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by genuine connection.
It really is. And her character adds another layer to the music in the film, too. We talked about "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch," capturing the Grinch's mischievous side.
Right.
Well, Cindy Lou Who's song, "Where Are You, Christmas?" it expresses this deep longing for the real spirit of the holiday.
Absolutely. And the contrast between those two songs highlights that tension between cynicism and hope that runs through the whole story.
It's so clever how they use the music to explore the characters' feelings and the different values at play.
It really is.
And the score overall, like we said before, it blends that Seussian whimsy with this magical holiday feeling.
It's not your typical Christmas movie music. It has this playfulness and sense of wonder that fits perfectly with Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, it's unique.
And James Horner, the composer, he was known for creating scores that captured the emotions of a film really well.
He was incredibly talented.
And in this case, he found this beautiful balance between the lightheartedness of Dr. Seuss and the deeper themes of the story.
So we end up with a score that's both memorable and emotionally resonant.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting to think about how this movie, with all the debate about how faithful it is to the book and all the added layers of complexity, it's still such a big part of so many people's holiday traditions. It's not just a kids' movie, it's a cultural phenomenon that makes people think and talk about it.
You're absolutely right. It shows how powerful Dr. Seuss's story is and how adaptations can spark new conversations and introduce these characters to new generations.
That's true. So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into How the Grinch Stole Christmas, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be paying attention to when they watch it again?
I think the most important thing is to watch it being aware of the choices the filmmakers made. Both in terms of the visuals and the story itself.
So thinking about how those choices affect the impact and the message of the original story.
Yes, exactly. Pay attention to how Jim Carrey's comedic style influences how we see the Grinch, how the fancy visuals add to or maybe distract from the emotional core, and how those extra plot points and character development change the overall narrative.
And how they try to balance staying true to the original story with updating it for modern audiences.
Precisely. Think about how the portrayal of the Whos and their materialism might resonate differently with different people. And don't forget about the music and the sound design, how they create the atmosphere and bring out the emotions of the film.
So it's like watching it with fresh eyes and ears, maybe even a more critical perspective.
Exactly. It's about engaging with the movie on a deeper level, seeing what works, what doesn't, and forming your own opinion about it as an adaptation.
And maybe even having some fun debates with friends and family about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because film is subjective, right? What one person loves, another person might not connect with. It's great to appreciate all those different perspectives.
So the next time you're watching How the Grinch Stole Christmas, try to see it not just as entertainment, but as a reflection of how we interact with classic stories and how those stories change over time.
And remember that even the most familiar stories can surprise you when you take a closer look.
It's amazing how much there is to talk about with a story that seems so simple on the surface.
It really is. And that's kind of what makes art so great,
Yeah.
It sparks these conversations and makes you think.
Yeah, I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into How the Grinch Stole Christmas, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners will take away from all this?
I'd say think about the last time you actually sat down and watched this movie.
Okay.
And did anything feel different this time, now that we've kind of dug into some of the details?
Ooh, I like that.
Like, did you notice things you hadn't before? Maybe about the music or the visuals, or even how Jim Carrey played the Grinch.
That's a really good point. It's easy to watch these holiday movies without really thinking about them, just getting caught up in the nostalgia and the festive mood.
Right.
But when you actually pay attention to the details, it can totally change how you see the movie.
It really can. And maybe this deep dive got you thinking about some new things, like about the message of the film, the choices the filmmakers made, or even how it relates to how we feel about the holidays.
Yeah, I can see that. Maybe some people are now thinking, you know what? I wish they'd kept it simpler, closer to the book.
Yeah.
And others might be thinking, Wow, I appreciate all those extra layers and how visually stunning it is.
And both of those perspectives are totally valid. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about engaging with the movie on a deeper level and being open to different interpretations.
Exactly. And I love that it can spark conversations, get people talking and debating with their friends and family about the movie's strengths and weaknesses.
I love that too, because in the end, that's part of what makes these holiday films so special, right?
Absolutely. They bring people together, make us think a little more deeply about the things we value, and maybe even help us understand our own holiday traditions better.
I think you nailed it. So as you gather with your loved ones this holiday season and maybe put on that Grinch DVD, remember that there's so much more to this movie than meets the eye.
It's true. It's not just a simple story. It's a cultural touchstone with a lot to say.
And who knows, maybe you'll see this classic tale in a whole new light after our discussion.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Happy holidays.